Barron Trump leaned into the microphone. His voice was steady, but dripping with the smugness of entitlement, and in an instant, he reached for the lowest weapon he could find: Jasmine Crockett's very identity. The insult didn't come wrapped in policy or clever debate. It came sharp, ugly, and personal. It was meant to cut deeper than any argument ever could. And for a split second, the room froze. Gasps echoed through the hall, a ripple of disbelief breaking over the audience like a wave. People clutched their phones tighter, already typing, already recording. The insult wasn't just an attack on her. It was an attack on millions who saw themselves in her, their names, their heritage, their dignity dragged out for mockery. Barron's smirk lingered, the confidence of someone who had never paid the price for cruelty, someone who believed the power of his last name could shield him forever. And then there was Jasmine. She didn't flinch. She didn't rush. She didn't try to talk over him. Instead, she stood perfectly still, eyes locked, her silence louder than any applause. It was the silence of a storm gathering its force. That pause 5 long seconds wasn't weakness. It was control. Viewers around the country leaned closer to their screens. Comment sections flared alive in real time, disbelief spilling into outrage, outrage into demands for justice. The insult had landed, yes, but now everyone was asking the same question. How would she answer? Barron shifted, a flicker of unease breaking through his cocky veneer as he realized his words were hanging heavier than he planned. The silence stretched, unbearable. Jasmine's composure cut through the air like steel, her gaze refusing to yield. And then, just as his smirk began to falter, she drew a breath, ready to speak. Her vow would not be shouted. It would not be rushed. It would be deliberate, piercing, unforgettable. And in the next heartbeat, she would deliver the line that shattered him, that turned his insult back into a weapon of his own undoing. But in just 5 seconds, Jasmine would deliver a vow that shattered him and silenced the room. What Barron Trump hurled across that stage wasn't just another jab in a heated debate. It was a reminder of how power, privilege, and prejudice often converge in the ugliest ways. His insult wasn't crafted as policy critique or a clash of ideas. It was designed to strip Jasmine Crockett of her identity, to reduce her to something smaller, something he believed the crowd could dismiss. And that is what made the moment so dangerous and so electrifying, because this was bigger than one exchange. It was bigger than the politics of the evening. This was about America itself, about who gets to stand tall in the spotlight and who is told to sit down, shut up, and accept their place. Every immigrant who's ever had their accent mocked, every woman who's ever been told she's too loud or too much, every person of color who's been questioned not for their ideas but for the right to even exist in the conversation. They all heard Barron's words. And they weren't just words. They were the familiar sting of a society that too often rewards arrogance and punishes dignity. Yet that's why Jasmine's response mattered so much. She represented something more than herself in that moment. Standing there, calm and unshaken, she was a mirror for millions who had faced the same attacks and wondered if composure could ever prevail. Her silence wasn't just silence, it was defiance. And the audience knew it. The people watching at home felt it in their bones. Social media began to pulse with tension, clips spreading within seconds, captions screaming variations of the same truth. Did he really just say that? The stakes weren't just about one man trying to belittle a congresswoman. They were about the way this country defines strength. Would it be the strength of inherited power, wielded recklessly and without consequence? Or would it be the strength of lived experience, of someone who had earned her place through grit and service? Barron's arrogance was on full display, but Jasmine's composure was about to show a different kind of power, one rooted not in a name, but in a vow. Viewers watching live had no idea they were about to witness history. They only knew they were sitting on the edge of their seats, waiting for Jasmine's lips to part, waiting for the explosion that everyone felt building in the silence. And as Barron's smugness grew heavier and the cameras zoomed closer, the contrast sharpened. Privilege on one side, perseverance on the other. It was no longer just a debate. It was a stage where America's deepest questions about dignity, identity, and justice were playing out in real time. But before we get to the vow, we need to understand who Barron really was in this moment. To understand the venom in Barron Trump's words, you have to understand the weight he carries, not the weight of responsibility, but the weight of privilege. From the moment he entered public life, his surname functioned as both shield and sword. Barron didn't have to claw his way to a microphone. He didn't have to prove his right to stand under the hot lights of national scrutiny. The stage was handed to him, polished and waiting, courtesy of a family name synonymous with wealth, bluster, and power. But with that inheritance came a posture of arrogance. He spoke as though he were untouchable, every word delivered with the smirk of someone who had never faced the kind of struggles ordinary Americans endure daily. While others worked double shifts, navigated discrimination, or battled systemic barriers, Barron learned early on that his last name could erase obstacles before he even noticed they existed. That kind of insulation breeds entitlement, and entitlement breeds contempt. So when Barron lashed out at Jasmine Crockett's identity, it wasn't an isolated slip of the tongue. It was the culmination of years of learning the wrong lesson. That cruelty gets applause, that insults win airtime, and that mocking someone else's roots is fair game when your own privilege has never been questioned. He wasn't speaking as a thoughtful young man shaping his own path. He was channeling the same playbook his father had perfected: bulldoze opponents with ridicule, distract from weakness by attacking identity, and smile while doing it. Yet here's the contradiction. Beneath the swagger was fragility. For all his bravado, Barron's standing had always depended on the scaffolding of family legacy. Remove the Trump name and what was left? No record of service, no story of sacrifice, no evidence of overcoming hardship. Just the comfort of a gilded upbringing and the arrogance it produced. He had wealth, yes. He had recognition, yes. But what he lacked was authenticity, and the audience could sense it. That lack of authenticity made the insult even more hollow. It revealed desperation. Why go after Jasmine's identity unless he feared her strength? Why punch down unless he recognized deep down that her story had more weight than his? That contradiction was the hypocrisy at the core of his attack. A man who had been given everything trying to strip dignity from a woman who had earned everything. And that hypocrisy mirrored the family legacy itself. The Trump brand had always thrived on building golden towers while ignoring the crumbling foundations beneath them. It celebrated wealth without acknowledging exploitation, fame without substance, and power without accountability. Barron's words, whether he realized it or not, carried the echo of that same pattern. They weren't just his insult. They were the family creed spoken through him. Diminish others to elevate yourself. The crowd heard it. The cameras captured it. And millions online saw it for what it was: not strength, but weakness disguised as arrogance. His smirk no longer looked powerful. It looked petty. His posture no longer looked commanding. It looked insecure. And the longer the silence stretched, the more those watching began to recognize that this wasn't Jasmine Crockett's problem to solve. It was Barron Trump's unmasking. Because in that room, Barron wasn't just a young man with a microphone. He was the heir to a dynasty of division, performing the role that had been written for him long before he ever stepped onto that stage. The insult was his line in the script, and he delivered it exactly as expected. But what he didn't expect was the woman across from him, calm, composed, and ready to break the entire act apart. And yet across the room, Jasmine Crockett's story was the perfect foil. Before Jasmine Crockett ever set foot in Congress, before her name was splashed across headlines or whispered in political circles, she was simply a young woman raised in the rhythms of ordinary struggle. Her story didn't begin in luxury suites or marble towers. It began in neighborhoods where dignity was something you carried inside, even when the world outside tried to strip it away. Jasmine grew up watching resilience in real time. Her family instilled in her the value of service and sacrifice, of speaking up when silence was easier, of holding your head high even when the odds were stacked against you. These weren't abstract lessons. They were lived truths. When resources were tight, when opportunities were scarce, she learned to fight for them. She learned that nothing would be handed to her, and that every inch gained came through grit. Those early experiences etched into Jasmine a kind of toughness that doesn't scream or posture. It's the quiet strength of someone who has faced doors slammed in her face, yet still knocked on the next one. She knew what it meant to be underestimated. She knew what it felt like to be dismissed. And she knew that the only way forward was to transform those slights into fuel. That fuel carried her into advocacy. Long before national cameras sought her out, Jasmine was on the ground, fighting for the marginalized, defending those without resources, standing with communities too often overlooked. She became a voice in courtrooms and community halls, unafraid to confront injustice where it lived. And each case, each fight, each victory and setback alike built her into the leader the country would one day see. But her rise wasn't just professional, it was deeply personal. Jasmine understood the power of identity because she had lived through moments when hers was questioned, doubted, even weaponized against her. She knew what it meant to be told she didn't belong, to have her very presence framed as a threat. And yet she also knew the flip side. The unshakable pride that comes from embracing your roots, your heritage, your unfiltered self. That pride became her anchor, the thing that kept her steady when the storm tried to knock her down. By the time she entered the national stage, Jasmine Crockett was no stranger to confrontation. But unlike her opponents, she didn't thrive on spectacle or cruelty. She thrived on clarity, on truth spoken with conviction, on the kind of composure that makes people lean in rather than look away. She didn't need to insult to win. She didn't need to mock to gain attention. Her power came from the authenticity of her journey, a journey carved out of persistence, humility, and unshakable dignity. That authenticity is what made her such a threat to someone like Barron Trump. His power was inherited. Hers was earned. His confidence was borrowed. Hers was built. He wore arrogance like armor, but she carried resilience like a weapon sharpened over years of struggle. And though the cameras that night captured only seconds of silence, what they couldn't capture was the lifetime of preparation that stood behind it. Because Jasmine's silence wasn't the silence of defeat. It was the silence of calculation. It was the silence of someone who had faced worse insults in smaller rooms, without an audience to cheer her on, and learned that the best response isn't always immediate. It was the silence of a woman who had been underestimated so many times that she knew how to use it to her advantage. Her upbringing had taught her patience. Her advocacy had taught her precision. Her struggles had taught her perseverance. All of it converged on that stage, in that moment, as Barron Trump's insult echoed through the room. Millions watching at home may not have known every detail of Jasmine Crockett's past, but they felt it in the way she held herself. They felt the weight of her story in the calm of her eyes, in the strength of her posture, in the refusal to be rattled. She wasn't just standing there for herself. She was standing there for everyone who had ever been told they were too different, too loud, too other to deserve respect. And that is why the silence was so devastating. Because silence in the hands of someone forged in adversity is not weakness. It's the moment before the storm. It's the inhale before the vow. So when the insult came, her silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. The room still buzzed with the aftershock of Barron's insult when the debate moderator tried to regain control. But control was already slipping. Barron leaned back in his chair with the smug ease of someone who believed the moment belonged to him. He doubled down, tossing out jabs with the casual cruelty of a man who thought laughter was on his side. Each word carried the same smug rhythm, the same attempt to provoke, yet Jasmine didn't give him what he wanted. No raised voice, no flustered rebuttal. Instead, she remained perfectly composed, her hands folded, her eyes steady. The silence between his insults and her stillness became unbearable. Viewers at home leaned forward, waiting for her to snap back, but she didn't, and that refusal only made Barron louder. "You see?" he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "They can't even answer. They don't belong here. They never did." He laughed at his own words, but it was the nervous laughter of someone performing for approval, not the laughter of someone secure. The imbalance was stark. Barron thrived on spectacle-throwing words like punches, hoping to rattle his opponent. Jasmine thrived on precision studying, calculating, holding her composure until the exact right moment. The tension was building like a slow drumbeat, each strike of arrogance matched by an even deeper stillness. And the audience felt it. The crowd in the hall was split, some jeering, some gasping, some waiting in suspense. Online, the comment sections were already lighting up, hashtags beginning to trend, memes being drafted in real time. People knew they were watching something more than a debate. This was a clash between entitlement and endurance, arrogance and authenticity. Every insult Barron threw became less powerful, less shocking. What began as venom slowly revealed itself as desperation. He was scrambling to keep the upper hand, piling words on top of words, as if sheer noise could cover the fact that his opponent was not breaking. The cameras zoomed in his smirk, faltering just slightly, her composure hardening with every second. The moderator tried again, urging them back to policy, back to order. But the crowd wasn't interested in policy anymore. They were transfixed by the human drama unfolding before them, the slow unraveling of arrogance against the immovable weight of dignity. Barron gestured wildly, his frustration seeping through. Jasmine remained calm, her lips pressed into the faintest of smiles, the kind that told viewers she wasn't cornered. She was waiting, and that waiting was unbearable. Every second stretched longer, every pause thick with suspense. Viewers could sense it, even if they couldn't name it. Something was coming. Jasmine's silence wasn't hesitation. It was strategy. She was letting him expose himself, letting him dig deeper, letting the arrogance pile high enough to collapse under its own weight. The room's energy shifted. Barron's words no longer landed with power. They landed with emptiness. He was fighting harder, but achieving less. The imbalance had inverted his noise, making him weaker, her calm making her stronger. And then, in 5 words, Jasmine Crockett shattered him. The drumbeat of tension had built to its peak. Barron's insults still echoed in the air, each one emptier than the last, each one increasingly desperate. The room hung heavy in silence as he paused to catch his breath, grinning as if he had scored a decisive blow. His arrogance swelled until Jasmine finally leaned forward. 5 words. That was all it took. Her vow, delivered calmly, precisely, with a tone that cut sharper than any shout. I will outlast your hate. The air shifted instantly. It wasn't just a rebuttal. It was a promise. A vow born not out of rage but out of an unshakable conviction. She didn't shout to be heard, she didn't need to. Each word landed like the toll of a bell, echoing through the chamber, reverberating in the hearts of those watching. The crowd gasped, some cheering, some stunned into silence. Even those who had come expecting Barron to dominate couldn't ignore what had just happened. His smirk faltered, his jaw tightening. For the first time, the power dynamic shifted before everyone's eyes. Jasmine's delivery was more than a comeback. It was a masterclass in control. She had waited. Let him expend every ounce of energy. Let him drown himself in arrogance. And then, when the room was begging for release, she gave them 5 words that carried the weight of her life, her struggles, and her truth. It wasn't an attack. It was a vow. And vows carry permanence. Barron shifted in his seat, trying to recover, but his body betrayed him. His posture sagged just slightly. The boy who entered the stage dripping in untouchable bravado suddenly looked young, untested, small. The cameras caught it, the way his eyes flicked downward, the way his smirk trembled at the edges. For the first time he looked rattled. Meanwhile, Jasmine held her ground. She didn't gloat. She didn't elaborate. She let the power of her words breathe, let them settle in the air like a storm cloud that had finally broken. The audience roared, the kind of roar that isn't just applause but recognition. People were standing, clapping, recording. On social media, clips of the vow were already looping, captions screaming 5 seconds, 5 words, game over. The brilliance of the moment was in its restraint. Anyone else might have tried to match Barron's volume, to trade insult for insult, to sink into the mud. Jasmine refused. Her vow wasn't about him, it was about something larger, something eternal. She wasn't promising to win a debate. She was promising that his hatred, and all the hatred it represented, would not endure. She would. Her people would. Her dignity would. And that was the dagger. Because deep down, even Barron knew it was true. Arrogance fades. Privilege cracks. Names lose their power when they're built on cruelty. But resilience, real, hard-earned resilience, outlasts everything. The moderators froze, unsure whether to move on or let the moment breathe. The audience had made the decision for them, rising to their feet in a chorus of cheers and stunned murmurs. The energy had shifted irreversibly. No one would remember the specifics of policy discussed that night. No one would cite Barron's talking points. What they would remember, what would be replayed endlessly in classrooms, news segments, TikToks, and late-night monologues, were those 5 words. And Barron knew it. He tried to recover, his voice breaking the noise, reaching for another insult. But the attempt sounded hollow. His sentences stumbled. His arrogance, once his weapon, had become his weakness. Every word he spoke afterward was measured against her vow, and every word fell short. The room wasn't his anymore. It belonged to Jasmine. She didn't need to say another thing. Her body language told the story. Poised, composed, unshaken. She had turned his insult into her stage. The vow echoed louder than anything else spoken that night. It was the kind of moment political careers are made of. The kind of moment history books underline. The kind of moment that sears itself into collective memory. The aftermath began instantly. Commentators whispered into microphones with urgency, trying to put into words what they had just witnessed. Audience members scrambled to upload their recordings, desperate to be the first to share it. Hashtags surged, clips hit millions of views before the debate had even ended, and pundits across the spectrum began framing it as the turning point of the night. And through it all, Jasmine remained still. She had no need to bask in the chaos. The vow had been enough. It was the essence of her story distilled into 5 words. Endurance over hatred, dignity over insult, permanence over pettiness. For Barron, the unraveling had only begun. The cameras would not forget the way his smirk cracked. The public would not forget the way his eyes shifted downward. His attempt at dominance had backfired spectacularly, transforming into a national moment of humiliation. The clash was no longer about policy, not even about politics. It had become a parable. Arrogance undone by dignity, privilege silenced by perseverance, hate outlasted by truth. And the resonance of that parable extended beyond the room, beyond the debate, beyond the stage itself, because the shockwaves weren't confined to that room. The vow had barely left Jasmine Crockett's lips before it detonated across the digital universe. Phones lit up like wildfire. Clips of her 5 words were ripped from live streams, captioned in bold fonts, slowed down, remixed, replayed on loop. By the time the debate even wrapped, the hashtag was already trending. Nicer Crockett vows. Within hours, it wasn't just a hashtag, it was a movement. On Twitter, users posted side-by-side screenshots. Barron's smug grin against Jasmine's unflinching stare. "This is privilege versus power," one caption read. "And power just won." Memes exploded. Barron's face photoshopped into crumbling statues. Jasmine's vows stamped across the ruins. TikTok edits layered her voice over swelling orchestral music, turning her words into cinematic crescendos. Instagram reels flooded timelines with reactions, young women crying tears of pride. Immigrant families nodding with knowing smiles. Activists declaring the line a rallying cry. Commentators couldn't resist. On cable news, anchors interrupted regular programming to dissect the moment. It wasn't just a comeback, one analyst insisted. It was a redefinition of what strength looks like in American politics. On late-night shows, comedians replayed the clip with punchlines aimed squarely at Barron's faltering composure. Even rival politicians who had nothing to gain stepped forward to praise Jasmine's composure. "That vow," one senator tweeted, "is exactly what leadership sounds like." And then came the celebrity amplification. Musicians quoted her vow on stage. Athletes repeated it in post-game interviews. Writers wove it into op-eds, calling it the new mantra for resilience in the face of hate. Everywhere you looked, the line took on a life of its own. It wasn't just Jasmine's vow anymore, It belonged to everyone who had ever endured insult and refused to crumble. But the reactions weren't only from public figures. Ordinary people made it their own. A young immigrant posted a video. "When Barron insulted her, I felt like he was insulting me. But when Jasmine vowed, I felt like she was speaking for me too." Another clip showed a classroom of high school students replaying the moment on a projector, their cheers filling the room. Parents told their children, "Remember this line. Carry it with you." Even those who had never heard Jasmine's name before that night felt the shockwaves. She had entered their lives not with a policy proposal or campaign slogan, but with a vow that distilled something raw and universal. The promise that dignity, no matter how often attacked, cannot be erased. Meanwhile, Barron Trump's stumble became a spectacle of its own. Screenshots of his faltering expression circulated with brutal captions. "The face of arrogance meeting reality." His defenders tried to spin it, but their voices were drowned out by the chorus of mockery, by the viral tide too strong to contain. In the court of public opinion, the verdict was already in. Jasmine had not just won the moment. She had owned it, transformed it, immortalized it. The ripple effects stretched into politics, too. Commentators began speculating. Could this moment reshape Jasmine's trajectory? Was this her breakout? The kind of viral flash that cements a figure as more than a representative, but a symbol? Every outlet seemed to agree this wasn't just a highlight of the debate. This was history in the making, and for the progressive, immigrant-friendly, identity pride-driven audience watching from home, the validation was overwhelming. They saw themselves reflected not in the insult, but in the vow. They weren't passive viewers. They were participants in the story. Every retweet, every meme, every video reaction was a declaration. We stand with dignity. We outlast hate. The shockwaves kept spreading, unstoppable. From classrooms to late-night shows, from living rooms to protest rallies, Jasmine's 5 words became the anthem of the moment. And yet, the most powerful moment was still to come, the lesson Jasmine turned this into. When the roar of the crowd finally quieted, Jasmine Crockett did something extraordinary. She didn't bask in the applause, didn't twist the knife, didn't let the moment collapse into mere spectacle. Instead, she lifted the insult from the dirt and reframed it into something greater, something untouchable. She reminded the audience, both in the room and across the country, that dignity is not a gift others can give or take away. Dignity is earned, carried, and lived. Barron's words had been meant to diminish, but in the light of Jasmine's vow, they exposed something else entirely. That hate always reveals its own weakness. Arrogance might shout, but dignity endures. Mockery might sting, but resilience transforms the wound into armor. Jasmine spoke of America not as a place defined by exclusion, but as a promise born out of struggle. She reminded people that the truest form of patriotism is not in tearing others down, but in lifting each other up, in believing that every voice, no matter its accent, its color, its origin, belongs in the chorus of democracy. And in that reminder, her vow became more than a defense of herself. It became a universal truth. She turned the insult into a mirror for the nation. "When hate rises, it tests us," she said. "It asks if we will bend, if we will break. But when we choose dignity, when we choose resilience, we do more than survive, we lead." Her words carried the weight of countless untold stories, of immigrants carving out new lives, of families persisting through hardship, of women and men who refused to disappear even when history tried to erase them. In that reframing, Jasmine offered not just a response to Barron Trump, but a roadmap for everyone who had ever faced insult and indignity. She showed that true strength doesn't come from loud voices or powerful names, but from the unshakable courage to keep standing, keep fighting, keep vowing to outlast the hate aimed at you. The room, once divided, now leaned toward her. Even those who disagreed politically couldn't deny the resonance. They had witnessed something that transcended party lines, transcended partisanship. It wasn't politics anymore, it was humanity on full display. For the millions watching, it was permission to believe in their own dignity again, to reclaim what had been mocked, to hold it proudly, to vow alongside her, "Hate will not define us." Her words didn't just end the insult, they rewrote the story. And that is why this moment mattered. It wasn't simply about Barron Trump losing composure or Jasmine Crockett winning a debate. It was about affirming a deeper truth, that justice, resilience, and dignity are stronger than any insult, stronger than any legacy of privilege, stronger than the arrogance of those who believe power is permanent. Because this was never just about one insult, it was about us. Barron Trump thought an insult could silence Jasmine Crockett. Instead, her vow silenced him and electrified a nation. 5 words spoken with calm conviction flipped arrogance into humiliation and transformed a moment of cruelty into a symbol of strength. That is why this story will be told and retold, because it proves that dignity doesn't just endure, it wins. And that vow wasn't only Jasmine's. It belongs to everyone who has ever been dismissed, mocked, or told they don't belong. It belongs to the immigrant who carries their accent with pride. It belongs to the young woman told she is too much. It belongs to the worker who has been underestimated but refuses to bow. Each of us has the power to echo her words in our own lives. I will outlast your hate. That's what this channel is about, elevating the moments that remind us who we are and what we stand for. Because when dignity triumphs over arrogance, when resilience defeats insult, we don't just witness history, we participate in it. So if you felt the power of Jasmine Crockett's vow, if you saw yourself in her silence, if you believe that dignity must always stand taller than hate, then don't let this moment end here. Subscribe, share this video, add your voice to the chorus of millions who are refusing to be silenced, because this isn't just commentary, it's a movement, and movements grow when people like you carry them forward. Stand with dignity, stand with resilience, and together, let's outlast every ounce of hate the world throws our way.